Assalamualaikum and good day everyone. I am Hadeya Kamenza and together with my partner Miss Angelina Kangguan, we will be discussing climate change and energy crisis. So my assigned topic is all about climate change. So, what is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, such as through variations in the solar cycle. But since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapped around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Examples of greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. These come from using gasoline for driving a car or coal for heating a building, for example. Clearing land and forests can also release carbon dioxide. Landfills for garbage are a major source of methane emissions. Energy industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, and land use are among the main emitters. Greenhouse gas concentration are at their highest levels in 2 million years, and emissions continue to rise. As a result, the Earth is now about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than it was in the late 1800s. The last decade, 2011 to 2020, was the warmest on record. Many people think climate change mainly means warmer temperatures, but temperature rise is only the beginning of the story. Because the Earth is a system where everything is connected, changes in one area can influence changes in all others. So the consequences of climate change now include, among others, intense droughts, water scarcity, severe fires, rising sea levels, flooding, melting polar ice, catastrophic storms, and declining biodiversity. People are experiencing climate change in diverse ways. Climate change can affect our health, ability to grow food, housing, safety, and work. Some of us are already more vulnerable to climate impacts, such as people living in small island nations and other developing countries. Conditions like sea level rise and saltwater intrusion have advanced to the point where whole communities have had to relocate, and protracted droughts are putting people at risk of famine. In the future, the number of climate refugees is expected to rise. So every increase in global warming matters. In a series of UN reports, thousands of scientists and government reviewers agreed that limiting global temperature rise to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius would help us avoid the worst climate impacts and maintain a livable climate. Yet, policies currently in place point to a 2.8 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the end of the century. The emissions that cause climate change come from every part of the world and affect everyone, but some countries produce much more than others. The 100 least emitting countries generate 3% of total emissions. The 10 countries with the largest emissions contribute 68%. Everyone must take climate action, but people and countries creating more of the problem have a greater responsibility to act first. We face a huge challenge but already know many solutions. Many climate change solutions can deliver economic benefits while improving our lives and protecting the environment. We also have global frameworks and agreements to guide progress, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Paris Agreement. Three broad categories of action area are cutting emissions, adapting to climate impacts, and financing required adjustments. Switching energy systems from fossil fuels to renewables like solar or wind will reduce the emissions driving climate change. But we have to start right now. While a growing coalition of countries is committing to net zero emissions by 2050, about half of emissions cuts must be in place by 2030. To keep warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius, fossil fuel production must decline by roughly 6% per year between 2020 and 2030. Adapting to climate consequences protects people, homes, businesses, livelihoods, infrastructure, and natural ecosystem. It covers current impacts and those likely in the future. Adaptation will be required everywhere, but must be prioritized now for the most vulnerable people with the fewest resources to cope with climate hazards. The rate of return can be high. Early warning systems for disasters, for instance, save lives and property, and can deliver benefits up to 10 times the initial cost. So, what are the impacts of climate change? Philippines is the third most vulnerable country to climate change according to 2017 World Risk Report. Impacts of climate change in the Philippines are immense, including annual losses in GDP, changes in rainfall patterns and distribution, droughts, threats to biodiversity and food security, sea level rise, public health risk, and endangerment of vulnerable groups and such as women's and indigenous people. Philippines to lose 6% GDP annually by 2000 or by 21,000. The latest IPCC assessment report concluded that climate change will create new poor between now and 21,000. Poverty breeds disaster vulnerability, and those who have least in life risk like the most. Based on a study by the Asian Development Bank on the economies of climate change, the country stands to lose 6% of its GDP annually by 21,000 if it disregards climate change risks. This same study found that if the Philippines invests 0.5% of its GDP by 2020 in climate change adaptation, it can avert losses up to 4% of its GDP by 21,000, clearly a short-term investment with a long-term eightfold gain. Major rainfall changes in patterns and distributions. A 2011 Pag-asa report suggests a decrease in rainfall by 2020 in most parts of the country, except Luzon. As far as extreme rainfall is concerned, however, the number of days with heavy rainfall, example greater than 200 mm, is expected to increase with global warming by the year 2020 and 2050. So, what are the threats to natural ecosystems? Approximately 1 million hectares of grasslands in the Philippines are highly vulnerable to climate change in the future. Most grasslands in the uplands are prone to fires, particularly during extended periods of dryness and lack of rainfall during summer. Coral loss. The 2016 Low Carbon Monitor report foresees that 98% of coral reefs in Southeast Asia will die by 2050, particularly an extinction by the end of the century if current global warming trends will continue. The IPCC projects that by years 2051 to 2060, the maximum fish catch potential of Philippine seas will decrease by as much as 50% compared to 2001 to 2010 levels. Declining rice yields. So, an analysis of temperature trends and irrigated field experiments at the International Rice Research Institute shows that grain yield decreased by the least 10% for each 1 degree Celsius increase in growing season minimum temperature in the dry season. More intense droughts. Global warming exacerbates the effects of El Nino, the most recent of which was experienced in the country from 2015 to 2016. The Department of Agriculture estimated that 456,000 farmers have been directly affected by El Nino associated drought and dry spells during the last El Nino period. Next is the higher sea level rise. Observed sea level rise is remarkably highest at 6 centimeters in the Philippines, about 3 times that of the global average of 19 centimeters. This put at risk 60% of LGUs covering 64 coastal provinces, 822 coastal municipalities, 25 major coastal cities, and an estimated 13.6 million Filipinos that would need relocation. Next, we have the water scarcity. Climate change, rapid urbanization, and population growth drives water scarcity worldwide. A study conducted by the World Resources Institute predicts that Philippines will experience a high degree of water shortage by the year 2040. The country ranked 57th likely most water-stressed country in the 2040 out of 167 countries. The sector that will bear the brunt of water shortage by that year is agriculture, a major component of the country's economy and which currently employs percentage of the country's workforce. Next is the labor productivity decline. According to a 2016 United Nations study, ultimate change-induced heat in the workplace is projected to render 1% loss in working hours by 2025, 2% by 2050, and 4% by 2085. Next, we have the more public health emergencies. Higher temperatures also trigger the surge of diseases such as dengue, malaria, cholera, and typhoid. In 1998, when the Philippines experienced the strongest El Nino phenomenon to date, almost 4,000 dengue cases, 1,200 cholera cases, and nearly 1,000 typhoid fever cases were recorded nationwide. Next, we have the more women endangered and killed. A paper released by the World Health Organization examining gender, climate change, and health stated that the impacts of natural hazards such as droughts, flood, and storms affect more women than men and tend to affect women at a young age. Climate sensitive and gender specific health impacts affect women disproportionately than men. Climate change has already begun to impact our planet in more ways than we can think. Temperature continues to rise throughout the planet and we are experiencing changes in precipitation patterns as we have never seen before. The main cause of these catastrophic effects on our planet is pollution. Fortunately, there are always things that we can do to fight against climate change. Saving the environment starts with us, and it is our responsibility to act against these terrible changes to preserve the planet for future generations. So how to protect our planet to global warming? First is make your commute green. Millions of people drive to work every day. It is simply unavoidable in our modern day society. However, the downside to this is that millions of cars emit greenhouse gases that destroy our atmosphere. Vehicle emissions are a close second when it comes to the top causes of climate change. There are always other options that you can utilize to make your commute to work eco-friendly. For starters, taking public transportation to work is a great way to cut out emissions. Riding your bike to work is also incredibly helpful to be to the environment and is a great method to get exercise. Second, be more conservative with energy usage. Becoming more energy efficient is a great way to prevent pollution. It causes the power plants to expend less energy that can lead to the production of greenhouse gases. This means that you should do what you can to cut down on energy usage in your household. Make sure to turn off lights and unplug devices that you are not using anymore when you are done with them. Replace your light bulbs with energy efficient light bulbs to help you save electricity too. Third, get active and vote. One of the best ways to improve climate change is to help those who will fight against it into the office. This means voting for legislation and politicians that aid against the detrimental effects of climate change. Many corporations have politicians on their payroll and use them to lobby against legislation that would require more regulations against them. Voting the right people into office will help pass legislation that allows us to fight against these corporations that are mainly to blame for climate change. Fourth one, recycle. Manufacturing plants emit a large number of greenhouse gases per year. It is unavoidable in the production of goods that we use on a regular basis. However, a cleaner alternative would to invest in recycling. Recycling is a cost-effective and eco-friendly process that eliminates waste and doesn't emit greenhouse gases into the environment. Be sure to collect your discarded paper, glasses, plastic, and electronics to your local recycling center. The professionals will take these items to a processing plant where they will be remade into other recyclable materials again. Fifth, educate yourself and others. The importance of educating others about climate change cannot be overstated in our modern society. There are many platforms for us to utilize that can allow us to spread our message easily. Whether you see the word of mouth or social media, there are always ways to educate others on what climate change is doing to our planet. You can help protect the planet by educating others about the dangers of climate change and how to act against it. And lastly, encourage the use of renewable energies. Focusing your efforts to spread awareness about renewable energy is the best way to create a positive impact in your community. By informing others about how renewable energy is better than utilizing fossil fuels, you will sway others into investing into the idea. So that's all for my part. Thank you for listening.